Hi, and welcome to the session. PayPal moves Oracle Essbase to the Oracle Cloud and taps our autonomous database and Oracle Analytics Cloud. I always find the best way to understand the business value and the thought process behind the solution design is to hear it directly from the customer. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce Patrick Alessandrini, the Director of Financial and Data Services for PayPal. Hi, Patrick. Welcome.
Thank you, Gordon. And again, it's an honor to be here today, and thank you for letting us share our journey to the cloud. As Gordon mentioned, Patrick Alessandrini, Director of Software Development over at PayPal, with really a focus on the finance analytics community. We're responsible for bringing together the financials around budget and planning and forecasting at the PayPal Inc. level, and then ultimately publishing that on behalf of our stakeholders. You've all heard of PayPal, you're familiar with it, but really how this story ties back to the financial world is, as you can imagine, as we grow the organization, as we acquired Braintree and Payday and Zoom and Zettle and Venmo and all these different products and services, finance has a big job to bring financials together in an enterprise view and to ensure that our budgets and our planning and our forecasting are accurate, which ultimately feed the earnings binder and our guidance to the street. Today, we'll get to talk a little bit about the build and deploy that we did at PayPal for 19C. And as part of this, I'll take you on the journey, we'll talk about what the effort was, who, what, and how. I want to tell you a little bit about our Essbase environment. It's unique. It's a hybrid. People had questions about sustaining and support. What does it take to keep this platform up and running? We have a little wish list for the Oracle Idea Lab folks. And then finally, what's next over at PayPal for us? In terms of our journey and what was really the genesis for this journey, we brought over hardware from an eBay split, legacy hardware that was really end of life. We had the on-premise version of Essbase that really didn't have the latest bells and features. We also had our users out seeing products and getting pegged by vendors like OneStream and Anaplan. So we thought, how do we move us and modernize the environment while at the same time driving operational efficiencies, reducing costs, and doing some of the things that are important to our leadership? In addition, we evaluated what would be the most seamless transformation for our users. And given that they're all using SmartView, we recognized that moving to 19C from their perspective would only give them more features, but not really put at risk anything that we do today. With that in mind, we really discovered three things we wanted to do, right? We wanted to modernize our Essbase fundamental analytics platform layer for planning, forecasting. We wanted to look at products like EPM to say, when we want to do predictive modeling, when we want to do auto predict, when we want to leverage some of the features that other people are doing in the industry, we wanted to position those power users to do it. And finally, there is that subset of users that want to do visualization, that want a Tableau or a Looker experience, want to publish reports, email reports. So we wanted to make sure that our environment accommodated all the needs for all the financial users. In putting together the story for the business, we wanted to align the narrative with the things that are important to them, also to our executive leaderships that would have to budget it and finance it. So we really talked in terms of what are the targeted outcomes? What are the benefits to our business? Simplicity, how do we reduce costs? How do we improve collaboration? How do we create scale? And finally, governance. Everybody loves to make sure there's a governance bullet in there to say we're going to drive higher accuracy, better data quality, and just really better and consistent ways that we look and manage our data across the organization. And as I mentioned earlier, we didn't really want to be in the infrastructure business. I don't want to be in the data center business. I want to be in the analytics business. So by moving this to the cloud, we own the environment, not the hardware. We also wanted to create scale. We wanted to be able to put as many applications as we want, and we wanted to drive automation. And only through this modernization journey would we achieve those goals. And we also talked about we wanted new capabilities like predictive analysis and auto predict and what if modeling. And finally, we recognize that there's more demand at certain times of the month, whether it's month-end close or during the forecast flip, than there is the rest of the month, and we should be able to scale the systems based on those needs. So let's talk a little bit about the approach. Folks asked after the original built and deploy, exactly how long did it take, who did it, how much effort is it, and how do we plan for this? We decided to absorb all this work internally. So we did not hire an implementation partner. We worked side by side with Oracle to do all the planning and scoping and design. And then for the first 90 days, we really looked at all the things that had to be in place for this to be a success. Besides the contracts and the various approvals from InfoSec, third-party assessments. Obviously, we had to do a cleanup of all the users and cubes and filters because we don't want to move into a new clean environment. A bunch of legacy information is no longer required. We also sunset a bunch of jobs and a bunch of loads that weren't really necessary anymore. We also explored how the data integration is going to work. And depending on your organization, when we move data between security zones, because maybe our SAP is in one zone and Essbase is in another, we had to figure out how we were going to pivot that to shift to a cloud integration. And then finally, we had to make decisions about InfoSec, because they expect certain things like WAF and denial of service, whitelisting certificates. So all this should be in place in that first 60 and 90 days before you get into phase 2, which is development. Now for the development, we decided to spend a week or two just talking about the architecture, the VCNs, the number of servers, what private keys we need, vault passwords, etc., so that when we got to our first build, our dry run, all those things were at our fingertips. And we literally built a throwaway instance. And in all fairness, I would say we probably built 3 throwaway instances because we wanted to try all the features and buttons and kind of figure out what's the right blend for us. And when we completed that first build, we actually had a script that you could build your entire Essbase dev QA or production box in less than 4 hours, including setting up the load balancers, installing certificates, and really begin importing the data from your on-premise solution or building it from scratch if it's a new deployment. So this was our 120-day plan. I don't think it would take this long. If you hired an implementation partner, this would go very fast. But we were absorbing this work as part of our run the business. And of course, we still had commitments for month-end close. We have commitments for submission cycles and for forecast flips. So we had to balance our work with the time that we spent building out the environment. The last thing I just want to call out is about the training. I feel because the core features of Essbase mirror what you get on premise, there wasn't a huge shift to get to a cloud mindset for our people. I did ultimately hire one consultant because I felt that we weren't fully leveraging the power of OCI, and whether it was Oracle Analytics Cloud, whether it's OCI or EPM, our speed to market would be faster if we brought someone in that really understood the product and could help us find things more quickly. The one mistake I might have made was I probably should have sent everybody to Oracle University in the first year, because now that I've understood all the training that they make available out of the box, it's one of the best investments you can make. We have put it in budget, and I plan to sign everyone up for an annual subscription next year. And I'll pause there. Was there anything else, Gordon, on the effort that you think I should call out?
No, Patrick, I think you definitely covered it all. And I think the whole idea was on that deployment is the fact that it was done quickly. I mean, you were learning a brand new environment, OCI, and all the buzzwords that go with it, but it fit into your build. Right?
I have to say, I mean, we knew nothing about OCI. And again, the Oracle product is so effortless to do the configuration and deployment that we didn't have to wait for Oracle to tell us what to do. We would just build a test environment. If it was right, we would use it. If not, we'd Google it on the Oracle help pages, and then we'd go back and just rebuild it. And I mean, literally, to build your environment probably takes 45 minutes, right? The other 2.5 hours is spent set up configuration changes and things like that. So, okay, good. I'll move on to the next slide. Now, this is the slide that's going to take a little bit of discussion. As I mentioned before, we put a lot of time into thinking about our environment and what we want it to look like. I also will make a call out that how you build your environment will determine whether subscription licensing will be more cost effective than on-prem maintenance. Um, we chose not to split Essbase up into multiple instances and different servers for different business units. We have sort of a consolidated Essbase view. We have 10 terabytes of data. We have over 100 cubes in there. Some are planning cubes, some are just for things like legal entity, verticals, things like that. For us, this made sense, and we were able to integrate it. And as a product of that, we ultimately created really two environments, one primary, which is Phoenix, one alternate, which is Ashland, which is supposed to be a DR. I have to say again on the DR, we're going to be revisiting that because with all the fault domain failover, we might be a little old fashioned on this whole idea of having to keep and maintain a DR environment up. So we probably are even going to rethink that, given what we know a year and a half later. But with that said, we ultimately ended up with one VCN. Within the VCN, we came up with this concept of 3 subnets. The first subnet is for those things which are externally facing for port 443, which is like web connections. And that would be your Oracle Analytics Cloud or your load balancer. We then create a subnet, which is specifically for back-end work. So this is your Bastion servers, your ETL servers, SQL Server, and we decided to put our NFS storage there too. And for that, we only open up port 22. The third zone, which is the private zone, is where your application layer is. It's only reachable by the other 2 zones and never exposed publicly to the internet. I have to say, through this model, a couple things got easier for us. PayPal was very adamant about the security being similar to as it was on premise. So they wanted to leverage the proxy, the WAF, the DDoS, and the other things that we do today. So they advocated that everybody that comes to our cloud comes through PayPal VPN. And to come through PayPal VPN, you have to be logged into our network. You have to have a PayPal laptop. You have to have SSO. So we were able to inherit some of the kind of fundamental security that we have, and then just whitelist each of these zones based on the usage. So for example, the load balancer zone, we whitelisted every CIDR block at PayPal and said anyone from PayPal is allowed to come in with 443. But then, as we'll talk about in a minute, we'll apply the IDCS security to decide, do they really have access to Essbase? Do they really get to see the application? For the maintenance subnet, which was Bastion, things like that, turned out there were only a couple regions where our team resides. So we had a much smaller, lighter touch for whitelisting. And again, for us, we did not want OCI reachable by anyone unless you're a PayPal employee. The next layer of security that came in was around IDCS. And as I mentioned, we have the ability to do SSO, use the SSO from PayPal. So only users that are active in PayPal, that are registered in PayPal, can even get to IDCS. And then the next layer down is you can set it at the server level. So maybe you only have access to QA, maybe you only have access to production. And then beyond that, the application level, which cubes. And then ultimately, in the back end of the application, you could set additional security and filters if you want to set restrictions on dimensions and things like that. So we were able to embrace the security composite from the past, but find a way to deploy it and make it easy to maintain in the future. The last thing I want to note is, as I mentioned before, PayPal is very sensitive about moving data, and even within the organization. So for Essbase, we sort of had a rule of thumb that we would collect data in files, we'd move it using Dropzone so it's traced and audited, and then we'd load it into Essbase. So for us, it was fairly seamless to move to the cloud because it's simply a new Dropzone location. For other organizations, you might have to explore, creating those secure gateways, to move data throughout your organization. And I know this is a busy slide, so Gordon, I'm going to ask you again, is there anything else you can think of that I need to cover on this architecture?
No, I think the critical thing, and we've discussed it before, is the fact that, it's relatively simplistic design after the fact. But it deals with something that, as you mentioned at the beginning, that is sort of specific to PayPal. You did it because it fit what you needed it to do. And I guess the one question I would ask, I mean, I know the timing you had, for how much the estimates you had for development and production. The fact that I guess one of the questions is the fact that the security basically allowed you to not have to learn a brand new security solution. Did that help? And if so, like what sort of help did it make in getting you to a reasonable timeline?
Yeah, I should point out that we literally extracted the data from the on-premise environment and mapped it into import templates, both on the backend data sets, backend servers for the filters and rules and things like that. And we also mapped it for IDCS. So it was a huge time savings. Now, I should point out we did some cleanup because we discovered even in the old days, we might have had more security than we needed. And we were able to simplify the security composite. But it was very effortless, Gordon, for us to take what we were doing in the past, map it to where it needs to go in IDCS, and implement it, including the SSO. It was. By the way, we did not have SSO enabled on the on-premise solution. I should point that out. So,
okay, good. Yeah, and one other thing on the slide I was just remembering. So you mentioned, right, we discussed a lot about the Essbase. So the Oracle Analytics Cloud, I mean, and there's an autonomous database in there too. And I'm just wondering where exactly are the functions that are going in there as opposed to Essbase specific cores?
So yeah, we should call out the one difference with the cloud deployment is the way that the schemas and the security is managed for the database, right? So the actual server, the database server, has the data, and it has a U01/data, and all the files are stored there. But the instructions how to access them are stored in the ATP. That's where the schema data is. So this was sort of a change for us, Gordon, because historically my folks could extract the schema data from on-premise and understand how it's mapped. But today those are separated or bifurcated. That was kind of a shift in our thinking. And I'll talk a little bit about this in the lessons learned, about some things we might do different. Okay?
Great, thanks.
Great. Now, a little bit about PayPal and our hybrid environment. When we began this journey, we thought we needed 19C. Then the folks from EPM came in and showed us, well, look, EPM can do the same things 19C can do, right? And then the Oracle Analytics Cloud team said, but we have a really powerful visualization tool. And we realized that all three of them had distinct value in our organization. The EPM could have done everything that 19C did, but at a much higher cost. Because, as you know, SaaS and subscription license costs more. So if I signed up 400 users for a subscription for all these predictive modeling capabilities, but only 75 of them actually do enterprise planning, it would be like buying everybody all the premium channels and they only watch Disney, right? So we just didn't think that made sense to do. And also from an experience perspective, both EPM and Essbase Cloud have a Smart View plugin. So the user really doesn't know the difference whether they're in Essbase or whether they're in EPM. And we sync the environments so they can move seamlessly between these with their workbooks and never even know it's happening. But the folks that have to do the modeling, the folks that have to do the complex enterprise level forecast and planning, they get the benefit of the new features. And finally, the Oracle Analytics Cloud, in addition to helping Mac users that can't even use the Excel workbook, it provided those power users a chance to build some dashboards and reports and maybe even decks and things that they could do for leaders, and also schedule those and share them on a regular basis. So we found that having the hybrid was at no additional cost, allowed us to have all the best of class features that really aren't in any one product. I think Anaplan uses Tableau. Various products have strengths and weaknesses. And we just found by bringing these two together in a homogenized environment, we just checked all the boxes. Another question that came out of the last event was, well, how many people does it take to sustain this hybrid environment, right? You've got obviously the ETL servers, which extract the data. We've got 19C, we've got EPM, and we've got the Analytics Cloud. And the interesting thing about this was when we started this journey, for on-premise, we had 4 Essbase engineers in India and 4 Essbase engineers in US. That's still our team size. Along the way, unrelated to OCI, we discovered that we could give back our people more time to be Essbase engineers if we just hired a couple ETL engineers in India, which is fairly low cost. So they could be responsible for writing these ETL scripts and validating data and doing some of the things that really take a lot of time. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, we decided that adding one contractor for EPM OAC specialty, who's got sort of a minor in OCI, would also help us increase speed to market for new solutions. It would kind of give our people some training opportunities to learn from that person. And we had him for 1 year. We've decided to keep him for another year because it just created more capacity and more throughput for our team. And so I'm going to pause there and ask you again, Gordon, were there any other questions around the sustaining and support that maybe we want to address here?
No, I think that the question that, and you mentioned it comes up a lot, just how much does it take, how many people, which is great that you've got that. I guess in a perfect world, you never have to call Oracle for support, but I guess that the world is not perfect. So I'm just wondering what sort of expertise or what's the response or how is that working for you?
What, working with Oracle?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like sooner or later, something's going to break or you need assistance with something. So,
you know what? Most of our service requests with Oracle were questions, not outages or things like that. There's been a couple occasions where we actually needed them to get on a call and help us. And both times we got immediate response. So I have to say that there's been no outages per se that have lasted more than 30 minutes. But in our community, 30 minutes can be a lifetime when it's month-end close, right? Yeah. So that's what happened this week was for some reason there was a slight problem with IDCS for about 20 minutes. We tried troubleshooting it. We did some stuff. By the time we opened the SR, it was restored, right? But we didn't give up. We're still going to keep the SR and ask for details on the RCA. But that's the first incident of that in 2 years, right? So, and for all I know, it was a network issue on our side. So we'll troubleshoot that and kind of figure out what was going on. I think there's another context here I need to set. I don't know how big your organizations are. I don't know how many parts of your organization use Essbase. We are about 400 strong for FP&A in terms of analytics. And then we probably have a few dozen folks that aren't analytics, aren't FP&A that also use Essbase. And we also have dozens of downstream systems that consume our data for other types of analytics and reporting. So with that said, that's about the size of our community in terms of the user base. And it is 7 by 24 and it is 30 days, it is every day of the month, particularly busy around month-end close and forecast flip. On the other side of that, I just wanted to share that it seems that I kind of lost that train of thought. I apologize. There was 2 points. Size of the community. Oh, and the size of the environment. I apologize. I don't know, again, how big other people's instances are. As I mentioned, we have 7 terabytes of data. We have over 80 cubes that are actively used throughout the month. So if that helps create some context of the staffing versus the consumption, I just wanted to share those details. Okay?
Perfect.
Thanks. Okay, good. On to the lessons learned and the wish list. A couple things to think about. When we were doing our design, we looked at what we currently had allocated, and we decided to replicate that into the cloud, and not necessary, right? Because with Oracle, you can scale up. So if we built 10 terabytes for dev, 10 terabytes for QA, and 10 terabytes for production, but only production was using 6, we were way overstating our need. And you get billed for what you allocate, not for what is being used or what's being stored. So just a quick tip for you. Scale it to the smallest amount, not to the what they're currently giving you today. We talked a little bit about ATP and Bastion earlier, but what we learned too is that the default build, you'll get an ATP and a Bastion for each backend application server. And now we've since learned we don't need that, right? In fact, we could have shared one ATP across all the servers, dev, QA, and production, and consolidated that information. We also could have probably got away with one bastion as a primary and one bastion as a failover. So we'll probably, as part of our upgrade, we'll look into bastion as a service, so I don't have to deal with the patching, and maybe rethink that strategy. So you may not need all the servers that are built out of the box if you decide to go with a similar approach. Another thing is we have this DR environment, and our initial thought, it needs to be a pilot light, it needs to be running all the time. We realized after 6 months, it doesn't need to. You can literally stop the load balancer, and recover those costs. And probably our biggest pain point is around whitelisting. Since we have this need to always manually add the CIDRs, which are coming new for PayPal, recently they underwent some changes and they decided to kind of redo all the CIDR blocks, all the subnets. This creates a lot of maintenance for us. And especially when they're not publishing these proactively, they do have a website, but sometimes we don't know that someone has a new CIDR until the user opens, a ticket with us and says, I can't connect. So we're working on a partnership with them to maybe be on some sort of communication list to say this has gone live. As for our wish list, I would like a way that I can clone a box. See, I can take a block volume and restore it to another server, but it won't be able to read it until it has the schema data that goes with it. That's my wish list. That's what I want for Christmas, Gordon, right? I want to be able to somehow not only be able to restore a block volume to another server, but to also bring in the associated schema and security data that would be stored in the ATP. The second wish list item is Essbase. Essbase metadata in the OAC product. It seems ironic, but when you go to visualize Essbase and do development in OAC, not all the metadata comes through that you normally could see in SmartView. And this can be sort of painful because we do take great pains to document all of our metadata in the Essbase product and in the SmartView. We would like that to be visible in OAC. So we're working with them on that. And then finally, if you are moving off of on-premise to OCI, some of the admin features you might have used to have weren't available out of the box. So that report script validation, monitoring your active users, maybe cube usage. It's not the same experience in the Jet UI. So again, we've talked with Oracle about that, and they're looking at putting that in a future release. Okay. And so what's next at PayPal? Obviously, we want to upgrade to 21.2. We've been saying this since Q2, but we've been too busy. We're very excited with the features, and this will be part of our roadmap for the rest of this quarter. We also, in the spirit of what we talked about with that ATP schema replication approach and the capabilities of OCI, we really think we could simplify our DR strategy. We may not even need an Ashland. There might be a whole nother approach. So we'll be reading all the white papers on that, talking with Gordon and the Oracle teams to get recommendations on how we rethink disaster recovery. On Oracle Analytics Cloud, we are considering extending this so that we could integrate other data from GCP and Teradata and Azure. But I'm going to tell you, the red flag I have is that I do not want to become a BI organization. And my fear is that other groups, other domains like risk and GDS and other folks would start coming to us wanting to use the Analytics Cloud and have us support them for non-financial purposes. So I'm noodling that and figuring out how to put those guardrails in place, but I do think there's value propositions to creating that connectivity. Another thing that's on the horizon for us is really expanding the value proposition that EPM brings. One thing we've already got a successful selection for Oracle to replace our OpEx, which is currently in BPC and headcount. That'll be moving to Oracle EPM, and it's probably kicking off this month. We've been working with Oracle on some IPM, which is another capability that they have, and allows us to bring in third-party data, maybe pandemic data or stock market data or things like that. And then finally, ultimately, when all this is brought together and centralized around the OpEx, revenue, and headcount, our leadership would love to get a consolidated P&L view into all the information. And with that, I think I've covered all the key points. Is there anything else, Gordon, that you think we should cover in this discussion?
No, Patrick, no, I think that was great. And as you said, for the wish list, that's something we're certainly looking at. One's coming, and we'll get the others. In terms of going outside of support for non-financial areas, yeah, by all means, give us a call. We're more than happy to help with that one. So, very much appreciate the information and the details you went through. And no, it's been great working with you.
Yeah, and I want to thank you guys for your partnership. Again, this was all done with the support and help of the Oracle, working directly with our PayPal members. And I was really surprised at what we were able to accomplish together without a third-party implementation partner. So that's a key call out I want to make. Okay, thanks, Gordon.
Great, thank you.